Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, June 26, 2024. The Supreme Court rules for the Biden administration and against Republican states who tried to prevent the government from contacting social media companies to try to get them to deal with what the Biden administration said was misinformation. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in Tucson, Arizona, says that migrant encounters along the border are down over 40% since President Joe Biden issued executive orders 3 weeks ago. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's been talking to former President Donald Trump and expects Thursday night's presidential debate with President Joe Biden to be, quote, a sharp contrast between President Trump's positive agenda and Joe Biden's proven weakness. Republican Congresswoman Paulina Luna says she will go ahead and force a vote later this week on holding Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt of Congress, which could lead to his arrest. She says it's for his not giving the House the audio of President Biden's interview with the Special Counsel in the classified documents case. Democratic Congressman Jamaal Bowman loses a primary election after a record amount of money was spent, much of it targeting him from a super PAC linked to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. He represents a district in New York. State Department says again that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who was just set free in a plea deal approved by the Justice Department, put people's safety in jeopardy when he published online in 2010 confidential U.S. documents related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. White House condemns the start of the espionage trial in Russia of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and reality TV star Paris Hilton among the witnesses at today's House Ways and Means Committee hearing on improving foster care programs. She has said in the past that she was abused during her time in youth residential treatment facilities. Story from the AP. The Supreme Court on Wednesday sided with the Biden administration in a dispute with Republican-led states over how far the federal government can go to combat controversial social media posts on topics including COVID-19 and election security. By a 6-3 vote, the justices threw out lower court rulings that favored Louisiana, Missouri, and other parties in their claims that officials in the Democratic administration leaned on the social media platforms to unconstitutionally squelch conservative points of view. Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote for the court that the states and other parties did not have the legal right or standing to sue. Justices Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Clarence Thomas dissented. That was from Associated Press. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, reacted to the ruling on the Steve Bannon podcast War Room.
I'm shocked. I feel like our First Amendment has been hit hard. You know, this is a war on our free speech. It's a war on our First Amendment rights. And this was a heavy blow. This was basically one that may sink the ship. When you've got the Supreme Court weighing in that social media companies can censor Americans' free speech, that it's completely fine with the government to join in.
I got all the arguments. Mm-hmm. I agree with you 100%. And this audience agrees with you 100%. I got all that. Mm-hmm. This was not it was 6-3.
6-3 is bad.
Talk to me about the court.
Well,
I mean, you had the usual suspects in the three.
Of course,
pretty shocking. Who joined the liberal minority here? Is it not?
I think so. Here's my concern: millions of Americans died because of COVID-19, and children are still behind in school. Suicide rates increased. Millions of small businesses went out of business. The American dream completely died. It got slaughtered. People were told that they could not take ivermectin, that it was dangerous. Natural immunity all of a sudden became dangerous, and people were murdered on ventilators in the hospital. And our Supreme Court just sided with censorship of people's ideas.
With the sociopathic tech overlords, right?
Absolutely.
They took their side. Why do you think they took their side?
You know what, Steve? I can't process it because to me, this was a debilitating blow.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, on the Steve Bannon podcast War Room about today's Supreme Court decision in Murphy v. Missouri. Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, put out a statement that references Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, the committee chair. Gerald Nadler writes, as expected, the Supreme Court has issued a stinging rebuke to Jim Jordan and his multi-million-dollar conspiracy theory-fueled witch hunt. The court concluded that the social media platforms exercise their own judgment with regard to content moderation, which is precisely what we have heard from the dozens of witnesses that Jim Jordan has dragged before the committee. The court also pointed out that the basis for House Republicans' partisan reign of harassment against social media companies was inaccurate and outright false. I hope that after this humiliating defeat, Chairman Jordan and his colleagues will end their failed investigation into the companies, universities, and individuals who have been trying to stop the spread of harmful misinformation and disinformation on social media. That was the statement from Congressman Nadler. And from Bloomberg News, the U.S. Supreme Court is poised to allow abortions in medical emergencies in Idaho, according to a copy of the opinion that was briefly posted on the court's website. The decision would reinstate a lower court order that had ensured hospitals in the state could perform emergency abortions to protect the health of the mother. The briefly posted version indicated the majority will dismiss an appeal by Idaho without resolving the core issues in the case. The Supreme Court's press office said the opinion in the case has not been officially released. Patricia McCabe, the court's public information officer, said the court's publication unit inadvertently and briefly uploaded a document to the court's website. That was from Bloomberg News. From Washington Post, the number of migrants crossing the U.S. southern border illegally has dropped more than 40% in the 3 weeks since President Biden announced broad restrictions on asylum claims, administration officials said Wednesday. U.S. agents have taken fewer than 2,400 migrants into custody per day over the past week, down from more than 3,800 at the beginning of June, according to the latest Department of Homeland Security data. That was from the Washington Post. The Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, held a news conference today in Tucson, Arizona.
I just received an operational briefing on the success of the president's actions so far here in the Tucson sector and along our southern border, and the incredible work of our personnel. Our team did an exceptional job quickly implementing this new policy, and we are already seeing the results. Here in Tucson, we have seen a more than 45% drop in U.S. Border Patrol encounters since the president took action, and repatriations of encountered individuals in Tucson have increased by nearly 150%. As a result, in Tucson, we have seen a more than 80% decrease in individuals placed into immigration proceedings and our backlogged court system. Across the entire southern border, Border Patrol encounters have dropped by over 40%. We are removing more non-citizens without a legal basis to stay here, nearly doubling the rate at which we are removing non-citizens directly from Border Patrol custody here in Tucson and across the southern border.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, part of his opening statement at a news conference in Tucson, Arizona today. One of the reporters asked him about migrants and crime.
Hi, Secretary. Thank you for being out here today. Obviously, the media, the nation has had their eyes on the brutal crimes committed recently by illegal immigrants. One of them was actually wearing an ICE ankle monitor, yet this morning you said in an interview that the safety of the American people is the priority and that these individuals are vetted. But we know in our conversations with the ICE director, we've heard the FBI director say that there are significant gaps in intel. So what would you say to reassure the American people that they are in fact safe? And what would you say to the families who are mourning their loved ones because of these migrant crimes being committed?
Well, let me start where you ended. A message to the families is, of course, our hearts are with them, given their suffering. The safety and security of the American public is indeed our highest priority. We screen and vet individuals when we encounter them. If we learn of derogatory information subsequently, later in the process, then we take enforcement action accordingly. The individual who is responsible for a heinous criminal act is the criminal, and we need to bring the full force of the law to bear on that criminal, just as I did for 12 years as a federal prosecutor. We encountered dangerous people then, and we prosecuted them accordingly, and that will indeed continue.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas at a news conference in Tucson, Arizona. In Washington, D.C., House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at his news conference, was asked about the Biden administration saying today that migrant encounters at the southern border have dropped sharply.
Secretary Mayorkas is down at the Tucson border today, touting President Biden's 40% drop in the asylum process. Your thoughts on that, sir?
I could give you 90 minutes on Mayorkas this morning. We impeached him for a reason. I think he's the singularly worst cabinet secretary in the history of the United States. I think he's lied to Congress. He's lied repeatedly in lots of venues. They engineered the open border. You've heard me say it before. We documented 64 specific executive actions that Joe Biden and Mayorkas, as his accomplice, did to open that border wide. And we all know the catastrophe that has come from it. We're going to be dealing with the fallout for this for decades to come. And even if we are able to begin the largest deportation project, as President Trump has discussed, in the history of our country, it will be very difficult to find so many of these dangerous people because they have disappeared into the country. And that's why the FBI directors testified to Congress and said all their red lights are flashing. We're in a dangerous period because we have dangerous people here. When we went down to Eagle Pass January 3rd this year, we had the largest visit of congressmen down there. You've heard me talk about this event because it was so stirring to us. And they told us that estimated 70% of the people who crossed at Eagle Pass illegally were single adult males between the ages of 18 and 49. These are not huddled masses of families seeking, refuge from persecution in their home country. Most of these people, most of these people are potentially dangerous folks coming here with ill design. And I shudder to think that anybody, Mayorkas or anybody in his, in that chain of leadership could go to the border and try to pretend like they've done something positive for the country. They subjected every single one of us to potential danger and violent crime, just like the names of these innocent American victims who have already been subjected to this. For them to try to tout anything as a win is detestable to me.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference on Capitol Hill. The House today started work on the fiscal year 2025 spending bill for the Department of Homeland Security. A congressional quarterly summary reads of the House bill, brought by the Republican majority. It reduces funding for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, but provides additional funding for construction of border barriers and increases immigration and customs enforcement funding, particularly for custody operations and deportation activities. It also significantly increases Coast Guard and Transportation Security Administration funding. One day to go until the presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden, the expected Republican and Democratic presidential nominees this year, respectively. The debate will be hosted by CNN, but every major network, including C-SPAN, has been allowed to simulcast it. Our coverage starts 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. The debate is scheduled for 9 p.m., and then after, somewhere around 10:30 p.m., C-SPAN will get your reaction by phone, email, and social media. Speaker Johnson today said he has spoken to Donald Trump, and the candidate is confident.
With regard to the presidential debate, I expect that that question's going to come up about this. Look, like many, I look forward to hearing Donald Trump lay out his vision for the country. It's a positive vision. It's a forward vision. He is excited. I talked to him, spent a lot of time with him last week down at Mar-a-Lago, and then on the phone over the weekend, and he's in a very good place. And I expect that you're going to see a sharp contrast between President Trump's positive agenda and Joe Biden's proven weakness. And I did a lot of media over the last several days, and everybody wants to know which Joe Biden's going to show up. And look, my summary is this. It doesn't matter if he drinks a whole gallon of energy drinks. He's not going to be able to match the acumen and the readiness of Donald Trump. And that's what we expect. Even if it's a 3-on-1 situation, obviously the CNN moderators have shown an open disdain for President Trump. Everybody's seen the tapes rolling of all their comments, so we know it's not a fair fight. But Biden's still going to have to address America's concerns about his policies of high inflation and open borders and appeasement of our adversaries. Those are things that are on the hearts and minds of every American. And I know he's spending all week to prepare for it, but I guess that's how much time it takes to figure out how to defend that disastrous record. Good luck with that. So Thursday night will be an interesting thing.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at the news conference today in Washington. Story from USA Today, former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois endorsed President Joe Biden's reelection bid Wednesday ahead of the first presidential debate, arguing former President Donald Trump poses a direct threat to every fundamental American value. Kinzinger, who sat on the Select House Committee that investigated Trump's role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, In a video posted online, said, as a proud conservative, I've always put democracy and our Constitution above all else. That reporting from USA Today. Here's the video.
I'm Adam Kinzinger, and I'm a proud conservative. I always have been. As a proud conservative, I've always put democracy and our Constitution above all else. And it's because of my unwavering support for democracy that today, as a proud conservative, I'm endorsing Joe Biden for re-election. My entire life has been guided by the conviction that America is a beacon of freedom, liberty, and democracy. So while I certainly don't agree with President Biden on everything, and I never thought I'd be endorsing a Democrat for president, I know that he will always protect the very thing that makes America the best country in the world, our democracy. Donald Trump poses a direct threat to every fundamental American value. He doesn't care about our country. He doesn't care about you. He only cares about himself, and he'll hurt anyone or anything in pursuit of power. We saw that when he tried to overturn an election that he knew he lost in 2020. He attacked the foundation of this nation, encouraging a violent mob of his supporters to march on the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transition of power. Now he's become even more dangerous. He's called for termination of the Constitution. He wants to be a dictator on day one. He actually said that. And he's continuing to stoke the flames of political violence. There's too much at stake to sit on the sidelines. So to every American of every political party and those of none, I say now is not the time to watch quietly as Donald Trump threatens the future of America. Now's the time to unite behind Joe Biden and show Donald Trump off the stage once and for all.
Former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Republican from Illinois, posting that video. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said in his own video he plans to do counter-programming to Thursday night's presidential debate because CNN has determined he does not qualify to be on the stage.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here. Over 70% of Americans want a different choice than Presidents Biden or Trump. They're tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. Presidents Trump and Biden colluded with CNN to block me from representing your voices, but I'm not going to let them silence us. Go to therealdebate.com to watch me answer the same debate questions live. I'm going to be on that debate stage with or without their permission. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I approve this message.
The online video from the independent presidential candidate. Again, listen and watch a CNN presidential debate on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN 2 television Thursday night. Our coverage will start at 8 p.m. Eastern. The debate is at 9, and then after, C-SPAN will get your reaction by phone and social media. From State's newsroom, the U.S. House Republican Conference will file a lawsuit against the Department of Justice next week as it attempts to gain access to the audio tapes of Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview with President Joe Biden. House Speaker Mike Johnson made the announcement Wednesday during a press conference after being asked about Florida Republican Congresswoman Paulina Luna's plans to hold an inherent contempt vote Friday for Attorney General Merrick Garland. Luna and others aligned with her hope that the vote could lead to Garland turning over the tapes, despite Biden exerting executive privilege. Johnson said during the press conference that House Republicans are united in getting access to the tapes, quote, to confirm what's on the written transcript. That was from State's newsroom. Congresswoman Luna explained at her own news conference that she's going ahead with this vote on inherent contempt that could lead to the House Sergeant-at-Arms arresting the Attorney General because after the House voted to hold the Attorney General in contempt, the Justice Department declined to bring charges.
We are here today because of the double standard that exists within the justice system. As you know, on February 27th, the Oversight Committee, as well as House Judiciary, had sent a subpoena to Attorney General Garland, of which we received no response. And after referring him for criminal contempt within 48 hours or less, the Department of Justice refused to prosecute. Inherent contempt is clearly within our Article 1 authorities, and Congress does have the power to investigate all legislative powers. Investigations are part of our legislative process, and people that interfere with these processes should be held accountable. Inherent contempt was first used in 1795, and this was further upheld in a Supreme Court decision in 1927 in McGrain versus Doherty that stated that Congress does indeed have this authority. It's important to note that when an individual is called before courts across the country, they appear. Why should the Attorney General, who is supposed to be head of all law enforcement authorities, any different? Garland still has time to comply with this request. We are asking that he bring the tapes to the House and let us listen to them. But in the event that he does not, we will press forward with calling the privilege motion on inherent contempt to the floor on Friday morning. It is also important to note that if we as a Congress do not have the ability to enforce our investigative ability, that we are essentially going to be ignored and undercut and essentially handicapped by all other branches, which would make us not a co-equal branch of government.
Congresswoman Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, at a news conference. Not all Republican House members support this move. John Scott Duarte of California spoke to reporters this morning outside the House Republican Conference weekly closed meeting.
Have you researched the inherent contempt resolution, and are you going to support that?
I'm not going to support it. We need to take these contempt resolutions, impeachment resolutions, put them through committee. And when the committee comes back with a report, when the committee comes back with articles of impeachment, when the committee comes back with a conclusion after good process, then I'll consider these motions. I'm not responding and voting for every impeachment contempt resolution that comes along that hasn't been through the appropriate committees.
Is there anything more about this one as to why this specific instance you're not going to support it?
Well, just visualize what we're talking about. Going over and arresting the Attorney General in his office and bringing back to a small holding cell that we have somewhere under the Capitol. I guess there's a small holding cell. We have no facility to house an imprisoned Attorney General. It's just facially you can't understand how this is credible, and you can't understand how this would actually work if executed.
What about the rest of the majority of your conference? Are they in support of this inherent contempt?
I don't think it'll pass. I think there's enough of us that have looked at it. Now, how many of us won't vote for it, I don't know, but it's enough to kill it. Unless some Democrats want us to arrest the Attorney General. Then we'll see how that goes, but I doubt that's going to happen.
Congressman John Scott Duarte, Republican from California, speaking to reporters this morning. Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat from California as well, who's the House Democratic Caucus vice chair, also addressed this planned House Republican vote on inherent contempt against Attorney General Merrick Garland for not turning over to the House the audio of President Biden's interview with the special counsel in the classified documents case.
So I encourage you to look at the substance of what this is all about. If you watch the Judiciary Committee hearing on the contempt resolution against Merrick Garland, it's very clear, no one disputes this. We have the written transcript. This written transcript was authenticated by Robert Hur, a Republican who was nominated by Donald Trump. No one disputes that this written transcript is authentic. So why do they want the audio version of it? Republican Andy Biggs in Judiciary Committee said, well, we won't know if Biden said and. They want this transcript to highlight Joe Biden's stuttering. Joe Biden overcame stuttering as a child. He was bullied for stuttering, and he overcame that and became president of the United States. It is despicable and shameful that Republicans are seeking to compel this audio transcript, which is exactly the same as the written transcript except for the stuttering, and then highlight the stuttering to American people. Republicans should be ashamed of themselves, and I hope you write about that rather than the process.
Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, the House Democratic Caucus vice chair at a news conference today. From a Fox News article, Congress has not invoked its inherent contempt power since 1934, when it resulted in Washington lawyer William McCracken getting a 10-day jail sentence for not sufficiently complying with a Senate subpoena. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, which backed Congress's right to exercise its inherent contempt powers. That was from Fox News. And from NBC News, progressive Congressman Jamaal Bowman, Democrat from New York, suffered a primary defeat Tuesday to a moderate challenger who was backed by pro-Israel groups following a bitter and expensive race that exposed the party's divisions over the war in Gaza. The race between Bowman and Westchester County Executive George Latimer in New York's 16th district drew more ad spending, $25 million, according to the ad tracking firm Ad Impact, than any other House primary in history. Nearly $15 million of that spending came from the United Democracy Project, a super PAC linked to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, a powerful pro-Israel lobby. With 84% of the vote in as of Wednesday morning, Latimer led Bowman by a wide margin, 58% to 41%. That was from NBC News. Congressman Bowman spoke Tuesday night after his defeat.
This race was never about me and me alone. It was never about this district and this district alone. It was always about all of us. Now, our opponents, not opponent, may have won this round at this time in this place. But this will be a battle for our humanity and justice for the rest of our lives. And we are going to continue to fight that battle for humanity and justice for the rest of our lives.
Congressman Jamaal Bowman, Democrat from New York, Tuesday night speaking to supporters after losing a primary to George Latimer, who also held a victory party.
We go to Washington. We're one of 435, but we're not the only one. There are good men and women in Washington who feel the same way we do, and we have to find each other and link with each other. We have to look at the arguments of the far right and the far left and say, you cannot destroy this country with your rhetoric and your arguments. We have to have unity all across that continuum. And if you hold a strong belief, you still must work with other people who don't share that belief, because America hangs in the balance.
George Latimer, Tuesday night, he is Westchester County, New York executive, winning the Democratic primary against incumbent Congressman Jamaal Bowman in New York's 16th Congressional District. Jamaal Bowman was endorsed by the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, who's also from New York. And today at a Washington news conference, the House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California was asked about this race.
Yesterday we saw caucus member Jamaal Bowman lose his primary. Looking back on the way that primary campaign was run, do you think Democratic leadership could play a more active role in helping your own members?
I endorsed Jamaal Bowman. Democratic leadership endorsed Jamaal Bowman. Obviously, $25 million in spend is a significant amount in a primary. Our focus as Democratic leadership is exactly what we talked about today. How do we get the Congress and the country on the right path related to Roe, related to the affordability a concern that many Americans have? The only way we do that is by having a Democratic control of the House. And we get there by having 218 votes. So that's why our focus and our efforts have been on those districts that matter to us in November. And so that'll continue to be our focus as we march toward the November elections. Our expectation is that members do their business that they need to do in their districts to secure their victory. Jamaal Bowman's a dedicated public servant. I wish him the best in the future. I look forward to working with the Democratic nominee, George Latimer.
House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California at a news conference in Washington. George Latimer will face Republican Miriam Flisser, a pediatrician and former mayor of Scarsdale, who won the Republican primary unopposed. Story from CBS News, Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert has emerged victorious in the primary election in her new Colorado district. The controversial Congresswoman defeated 5 Republican opponents in a competitive primary in Colorado's 4th Congressional District and will be favored to win the seat in November's general election. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since 1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policy's debated and decided, all with the support of America's cable companies. C-SPAN, 45 years and counting, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's free, and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from AFP. The U.S. State Department on Wednesday renewed its allegation that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange put people at risk for revealing secrets after he was freed in a plea deal. Assange had published hundreds of thousands of confidential U.S. documents on the WikiLeaks whistleblowing website from 2010. The Australian agreed to plead guilty to a single count of conspiracy to obtain and disseminate national defense information and was sentenced to the time he had served in London, 5 years and 2 months, and given his liberty. Assange has become a hero for activists who point to his role in divulging information about the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but critics fault him for putting out vast quantities of government documents without any filtering. That was from the news site AFP. Matthew Miller is the State Department spokesperson.
I do think it is important when we talk about Julian Assange to remind the world that the actions for which he was indicted and for which he has now pled guilty are actions that put the lives of our partners, our allies, and our diplomats at risk, especially those who work in dangerous places like Afghanistan and Iraq. This was some years ago now, almost 15 years ago, so I think the world has forgotten much of it. But if you recall, when WikiLeaks first disseminated and published State Department documents, State Department cables, they did so without redacting names. They just threw them out there for the world to see. And so the documents they published gave identifying information of individuals who were in contact with the State Department. That included opposition leaders, human rights activists around the world, whose positions were put in some danger because of their public disclosure. It also chilled the ability of American personnel to build relationships and have frank conversations with them. And at the time, those of you who covered the State Department at the time will probably remember that in the days leading up to that release, the State Department really had to scramble to get people out of danger, to move them out of harm's way. It was an extraordinary effort performed by dozens of government officials around the world, but that doesn't change the danger that those actions put innocent people all around the world in through no fault of their own. And that's, of course, not even to mention the further actions by WikiLeaks down the road to essentially serve as a conduit for Russian intelligence interfering in the U.S. presidential election.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at today's news conference at the State Department in Washington. He also said the Justice Department acted independently in this case and did not face interference from other U.S. agencies. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is back in his home country of Australia after being freed from a British prison, flown to Saipan, capital of the U.S. territory of the Northern Mariana Islands, where in a U.S. courthouse he pleaded guilty to that one count of espionage under the agreement with the Justice Department that he would not serve any additional jail time. Barry Pollock, his U.S.-based lawyer, took part in a news conference today in Canberra, Australia.
Earlier today in a courthouse in Saipan, we had a hearing that brought to a close a prosecution that never should have been brought. Julian Assange has, for so many years, sacrificed for freedom of speech and freedom of the press. He's sacrificed his own freedom. And finally, today, that tragic situation ended, and we are all grateful that Julian is back home in Australia where he belongs, back with Stella, back with his children, reunited with his father. It is unprecedented in the United States to use the Espionage Act to criminally prosecute a journalist or a publisher. It's in the more than 100-year history of that law, it has never been used in this fashion. It is certainly our hope that it will never again be used in this fashion. Julian spent years in Belmarsh. No one should spend a day in prison for giving the public newsworthy and important information. In this case, information that the United States government had committed war crimes, that there were civilian casualties exponentially greater than the United States government had admitted in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was definitely in the public's interest to have this information, and Julian provided it to the public. He performed a tremendous public service, not a crime. The problem with the Espionage Act is there is no First Amendment defense in the Espionage Act. It does, by its terms, not matter the reason why you publish.
Barry Pollock, the lawyer for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange in Canberra, Australia. From Associated Press, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich went on trial behind closed doors on Wednesday, 15 months after his arrest, on espionage charges that he, his employer, and the U.S. government vehemently deny. The 32-year-old journalist appeared in the court in a glass defendant's cage, his head shaved and wearing a black and blue plaid shirt. A yellow padlock was attached to the cage. Journalists were allowed into the courtroom for a few minutes before the proceedings were closed. Also briefly permitted in court were 2 consular officers from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, according to the embassy. The next hearing for Gershkovich was set for August 13th, court officials said. That was from AP. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby spoke about this case in an online audio news conference.
Evan Gershkovich appeared in court today for the start of what we view as nothing more than a sham trial. I'll state it again. Evan has never been employed by the United States government. Evan is not a spy. Journalism is not a crime, and Evan should never have been detained in the first place. Russia has failed to justify Evan's continued detention. He, like fellow American Paul Whelan, is simply being used as a bargaining chip. Embassy Moscow was granted brief access to the courtroom before the proceedings began today. They were not permitted to speak with Evan. So obviously we're going to follow this closely, and of course our embassy in Moscow will continue to seek to attend any and all future hearings. Now look, I think this goes without saying too, but all of us admire Evan's resilience. I've seen it reporting that his friends say he continues to be in good spirits, which is just incredible given what he's going through. While we shouldn't be going through these proceedings at all, it's always reassuring to see his smile and to hear reports of his morale. We want both Evan and Paul to know that we all care deeply about their well-being, and that this administration will continue to do everything it can to bring them home. And that includes right now the effort to try to find a way to get these guys released and back to their families where they belong is ongoing. It's alive, and we're keeping at it.
White House spokesperson John Kirby in a virtual audio news conference. Wall Street Journal article has this: earlier this month, Russian prosecutors approved an indictment of Gershkovich falsely alleging that he was gathering information about a Russian defense contractor on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, Gershkovich was accredited as a foreign correspondent by Russian authorities. Another Associated Press article, Dateline Nairobi, Kenya. Kenya's president said on Wednesday he won't sign into law a finance bill proposing new taxes that prompted thousands of protesters to storm the parliament the previous day, leaving several people killed as police opened fire. It was the biggest assault on Kenya's government in decades. The government wanted to raise funds to pay off debt, but Kenyans said the bill would have caused more economic pain as millions struggle to get by. Tuesday's chaos led authorities to deploy the military, and Kenyan President William Ruto called protesters' actions treasonous. He now says the proposed bill caused widespread dissatisfaction and that he has listened and conceded. That was Associated Press. White House spokesman John Kirby was asked about this at his news conference.
Not that long ago, President Ruto was at the White House, and President Biden said Kenya and the United States share democratic values. Would you say that this is still the case after the response to the protests? And more generally, does the administration condemn the use of force against the protesters? Otherwise, how would you qualify what the Kenyan police did in Nairobi?
I'll tell you, as a democracy, the Kenyan Constitution does allow for the use of defense forces to augment police, particularly like in protecting critical infrastructure. At the same time, that same Constitution includes freedom of assembly. And the right to protest peacefully, and calls for the government of Kenya to respect the rights of all its citizens. So again, we remain deeply concerned about the violence that we've seen, and we absolutely condemn the violence. We don't want to see anybody hurt, and that includes violence violence that's perpetrated on innocent, peaceful protesters. So we're going to be in touch. We have been in touch. We're going to stay in touch with our Kenyan colleagues as appropriate.
White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby holding an online audio news conference today. Yesterday, the first 400 Kenyan police officers arrived in Haiti as part of the United Nations-approved multinational security force to try to restore order there. Armed gangs now control most of Haiti's capital city, Port-au-Prince. The UN says more than 7,500 people have been killed since October 2022. Also today, NATO appointed outgoing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte to be the next NATO Secretary General, replacing Jens Stoltenberg, who's stepping down on October 1st after 10 years in that job. On Wall Street, the Dow up 15, Nasdaq up 87, S&P up 8. Story at CNBC, the Federal Reserve said Wednesday that the biggest banks operating in the U.S. would be able to withstand a severe recession scenario while maintaining their ability to lend to consumers and corporations. Each of the 31 banks in this year's regulatory exercise cleared the hurdle of being able to absorb losses while maintaining more than the minimum required capital levels, the Fed said in a statement. Reality TV star Paris Hilton, begins a Reuters article, called for greater federal oversight of youth care programs at a U.S. House of Representatives committee hearing on Wednesday as she described her traumatic experience in youth care facilities. Hilton, 43 years old, the great-granddaughter of Hilton Hotel's founder Conrad Hilton, has spoken publicly about the emotional and physical abuse she endured when she was placed in residential youth treatment facilities as a teen. That was from Reuters. Today's House Ways and Means Committee hearing focused on reauthorization of a program called Title IV-B for children and youth in foster care, which the committee says expired in fiscal year 2021 and has remained largely unchanged since 2008. Here's part of Paris Hilton's opening statement.
Why can't we as a society see that these kids are hurting? They need love and kindness, not beatings and restraints. As a mom, these stories break my heart. When your child is born, your heart is full of love of all hopes and dreams you have for them. I assure you that these were not the dreams that were envisioned for Cornelius, Jasion, and thousands more who have suffered immensely. I am here to be the voice for the children whose voices can't be heard. While this committee has the responsibility to move bipartisan solutions forward to protect them, I strongly advocate for the reauthorization of Title IV-B. Families need resources and support so they don't need to come into the child welfare system in the first place. For children who do end up in foster care, we cannot allow them to grow up in facilities. The treatment these kids have had to endure is criminal. These kids deserve to grow up in safe, family-centered environments. I will not stop until America's youth is safe. I've helped pass 9 state laws on this issue. I am strongly advocating for the federal bipartisan Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act. I supported the Senate Finance Committee report, Warehouses of Neglect, that validates everything those with lived experience have been saying. And I recently went to Jamaica to support and find appropriate placements for American adopted youth who had been raped, waterboarded with a hose, and held in solitary confinement in a facility internationally. Their parents had adopted them when they were young, promised them a better life, and then shipped them off to an international facility to be warehoused there until they turned 18. How could we let this happen to them? Progress isn't an option anymore. It's a life or death responsibility. If you are a child in the system, hear my words. I see you, I believe you, I know what you're going through, and I won't give up on you. You are important, your future is important, and you deserve every opportunity to be safe and supported. Congress, please join me in creating a world where all children have a right to family, love, education, and the support they need.
Advocate Paris Hilton testifying before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee. Another witness was Tori Hope Peterson, who said she was in a dozen foster homes growing up. She's now a college graduate and a foster youth advocate and author of Fostered, one woman's powerful story of finding faith and family through foster care.
We could offer youth housing, or we could invest in them being taught the skills to acquire housing themselves, which could result in them having an investment to offer future generations, in turn, breaking generational cycles of poverty. When I was in foster care, I remember receiving a duffel bag of hair products I couldn't use, a teddy bear I was too old for, and many other products that went untouched. Now, when a foster child moves into our home, we receive 2 duffel bags full of useless products. While the emphasis of this movement started with the pure intention of not letting any foster child carry their belongings around in a garbage bag, I feel it is now an oversaturated movement to make the giver feel like they've done their part. We are here because our part is not done. I point to this illustration because it's an imperfect example of how society treats foster youth as a whole. Throw money at kids rather than invest time to nurture relationships with them. Isolate young adults in free housing rather than welcoming them in, or at least showing them how to obtain housing with a roommate like most young adults do so they're not so alone. These kids are all of our kids, and we justify treating them like they're not by handing them bags, clothes, products, and not our presence. While it is Title IV-E that offers youth in foster care these tangible resources and addresses these issues, it is crucial that we address Title IV-E alongside Title IV-B, because right now it seems that the system is giving young adults basic necessities that they need to survive. But when we invest in them to have strong and authentic relationships in their communities, we give them what they need to thrive.
Tori Hope Peterson, advocate for foster care youth, testifying today before the House Ways and Means Committee. Story from AP, many states are failing to track how frequently children in foster care facilities are abused, sexually assaulted, or improperly restrained, leaving them vulnerable to mistreatment. The U.S. Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General said in a report Wednesday. States that are responsible for nearly 50,000 children in these facilities are not doing enough to piece together which facilities or companies are problematic, according to the latest federal report. The 15th annual Congressional Women's Softball Game is tonight. Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican from West Virginia, one of the captains of her team, recorded a video on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol in uniform.
Good morning. Gorgeous morning in Washington, D.C., but later this evening we're going to be playing the Congressional Women's Softball Game, where the Republican and Democrat women join together to play against our common enemy, the press, and it's to benefit a wonderful organization, the Young Survival Coalition, which helps young survivors of breast cancer. So tune in, cheer for the Congress. We want to win, and I'll be proud to be representing my state and all of those who have been afflicted by cancer. So thanks.
Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican from West Virginia, posting that video. An article from WJLA-TV, Channel 7 in Washington, says that since its inception, the Congressional Women's Softball Game has raised over $3.7 million for the charity. Organizers estimate the 2024 game will raise over $600,000. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.